What up, players? Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions. And y'all know what it is. We're always here to celebrate hip hop. And today we're going to be celebrating hip hop in a special way with a special guest. But we'll get to that in a second. So today we are here to talk about the best albums of the 2010s. We're talking 2010 all the way to 2019, and we're breaking it down. But instead of hearing from me, y'all gonna have someone new to yell at in the comments today. So if you're a fan of hip hop, if you frequent Twitter, you know this dude I'm about to introduce. Good old Uncle Ed has been cool with this guy when he just had like a minuscule following. Now he's hanging out. He's hanging out with Rhapsody. He's hanging out with Elliott Wilson. He is hanging out with everybody. He's doing dances with Griselda. But I know him as Joe. Y'all know him as the one and only Joey Hip Hop. Joey, what's up, my man?
What's good, Ed? Thanks so much for having me on.
So happy to have you in the house. For those who are uninclined, tell them about yourself and tell them about what you do on social media.
Yeah, definitely. I started on social media, writing album reviews, and then it just turned into connecting with artists and building community. And so basically, I built a platform to, celebrate hip hop and celebrate the underground as well as, what's going on in the mainstream. You can find me on socials at Gotham Hip Hop. And yeah, that's about it. I just try to make it about the love and try to, find new artists and put people on. And it's been an amazing thing. And I appreciate you, Ed. Like you've put me on to so many artists. And especially when I was first getting started, I feel like I only had like a surface level knowledge, and you really helped me like develop my knowledge and put me onto some of the classics. So I appreciate you always.
Appreciate you because you keep me up with the newest and greatest stuff too. So it's a reciprocal relationship. But today I want to talk about the 2010s. I want to talk about the year in hip hop for that decade. Tell a little bit about like your fandom in 2010. How were you as a fan from 2010 to 2019? How was your fandom growing in that decade?
Definitely. Like making this list, looking back on it, it's interesting because I think from like 2010 to 2015, my list is like super mainstream. And it's because when you look back on it, I was like, that's me going from like middle school to high school, like starting to develop that consciousness, of like going deeper into discographies and listening to full albums instead of just like what you hear on the radio. So it's interesting going back and just thinking about like I feel like I know so much more about 2015 through like the second half of that decade versus the first half. But the first half really encapsulates this nostalgic feeling of like growing up for me in adolescence. And I think some of the kids that are like on social media now and like the older end of Gen Z that are, running a lot of these big pages, I think they have a similar experience to me where those, the Take Cares, Good Kid, Mad City, Nothing Was the Same, Forest Hills Drive, like some of these albums like were built into our teenage years. And so I think for me especially, I'm definitely like biased towards like certain albums, and we'll definitely get into it later because I think I have a nostalgia factor that you probably don't have for some of those albums because we just experienced them at different time periods. But overall, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I would say like besides the golden era 90s hip hop, like I would say the mid 2010s are some of the best hip hop that we've like ever experienced.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I talk all the time about how music is shaped by the formative years of when
Mhm.
you were a fan. So for your generation, especially like the social media generation, the
Yeah.
early 2010s, like from going into Wayne's dominance, going into Drake, Cole, and that era, the early 2010s, Kendrick Couture, like
Yeah.
that for some people is like their sweet spot. That is their golden
Hmm.
age. And for me, I would lean more toward the early 2010s, especially 2012, 2011. We'll get to that real soon. Like to me, that is where this new generation was really starting to like gel and
Yeah.
start to like really find themselves. Later in the decade, I'm gonna have some complaints. But for there, I think that was a good part. And you're right, so much of the loudest and strongest voices on social media really resonate with that decade. And
Mhm.
even the early mixtapes going back to like, the mixtape era of the late 2000s and going into
Yeah.
this, like so many of those artists got so much love. And as the decade grew, that was the foundation. So I wanted you to have you on because you have a different perspective than me. So we can go back and forth, but I think people are going to be surprised. There's going to be more that we have in common than people think. So
I think so too.
let's get it in. Let's start with the year 2010. Joey, what was the hottest album of 2010? And tell me about your experiences in that year.
Definitely. Overall 2010 I found to be sort of a slower year when comparing to like some of like 2014, for example, I think was like an amazing year. 2010, I went with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy by Kanye, and that's gonna be my only Kanye pick on this list. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I think that Ye on this album is like the peak of like asshole douchebag Kanye. And I think he like this album is so grandiose, and he takes full advantage of him being just this like ultra massive persona. And I think a lot of what he does later on in the decade is trying to recapture the like perfection that is on this album. And he's never really able to reach the heights of this album, but for what it is, I think it's one of the best albums of the 2010s, and it's a new era of Kanye. Like his best work to me is in the 2000s, but this is an entrance of a new era, and he's able to switch his style in a meaningful way. And yeah, I think it's a classic.
I agree. I think it's a classic. And as you said, toast to the douchebags, because this is the ultimate Kanye douchebag album. However, I'm going to shake the table because that's what I do. I do think that this is the best Kanye album without question of the decade. Ain't even close. Honestly, from here, it was all downhill. But when we get to actually dissecting the project, a lot of people, I mean, regardless of generation, feel like it's a flawless project. I disagree. I feel like that the album is very good. I do have a few issues with it. However, if I was to pick the album, in my opinion, that is the best of the 2010, get ready to throw rocks at your boy. If we're going to go beyond albums and add in mixtapes, I'm going to say it. J. Cole's Friday Night Lights.
Oh, okay.
It's better than My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Now, half of y'all just turn this video off, but let me explain why I think that. Because the Cole that we celebrate today, and don't get me wrong, I love Cole. This is peak Cole. This is the Cole that everybody was saying is the new Nas, and then a couple of years later, he let Nas down. I think he redeemed himself later on. I think we can say that. But this album has the production, it has the focus, but the thing that is missing, that I feel like the Kanye album misses, that this one gets, is the story of Cole. Because the story of this mixtape is a young man who is on the verge of stardom. Like, he knows he has what it takes to blow. But if you listen to these songs, there's some shreds of doubt. It's like, I know I'm going to blow. Am I going to blow? Am I? What does that say? I like that. I like that captures that generation. And whereas Kanye has like the ridiculous, grandiose stuff, I think Cole has a slightly better story to tell here. And in my opinion, it's one of the greatest mixtapes of all time. So my pick, Friday Night Lights.
That's a good pick, honestly. I also agree it's one of the best mixtapes ever. And I think from a rapping perspective, it's definitely better than My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Like, if you're just looking purely off lyrics. And I agree with the narrative aspect as well. I think the hits on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy outweigh the bad on that album as a whole. Sure. And just like, I mean? Like, I think it's some of those moments on Dark Twisted Fantasy are just so big that that's why I'm taking that over, something like Friday Night Lights, which I think is great too.
Absolutely. Not even going to argue that one. It's
Yeah.
almost 1A, 1B. So
Mm.
I'm going to go with J. Cole on this one, though. But roll with me to 2011. Tell me what was going on in your mind as a fan and your pick for the best album of that year.
Definitely. I know you're gonna hate me for my pick, but to set the stage, I think I was just entering high school, going to a lot of those like high school dances, and this guy was everywhere. But I think what like why I resonate with this album so much is because he was also like getting into his peak form, and he had released some good mixtapes, good albums, but this was where I really think he peaked. And so my 2011 pick is Take Care by Drake. I know you're not a Drake fan. I know you're not a Drake fan.
Joey, they not like us. They not like us. But I understand. And yes, from your perspective, I get it. And without question, it is the best Drake album, honestly, easily. So, like, I ain't too mad at that pick. I'm not too mad. But let me go a little deeper. My 2011 pick, once again, I'm not going to go with an official album. This is more of a mixtape. To me, is Big Crit, Return of Fab.
That's a good pick.
So we all miss Outkast. Everybody's like, oh my gosh, we want Outkast back, blah, 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 blah. To me, the closest we've ever gotten to a peak Outkast album is this mixtape. You got this dude from Mississippi who is telling his life very authentically in these soulful beats, this very introspective work and production. It's incredible. And I thought that this was another, like Cole, this was a star-making turn. I was like, okay, Cole and Crit, these are going to be the dudes that are going to dominate this decade. Sort of happened, sort of didn't happen. A lot of factors that play. But to me, I thought this was the best by far. So I'm going to go with Crit on this.
That's a good pick. I agree. He's always been in that sort of tier that like had the quality but didn't have the commercial success of the likes of Cole, Kendrick, Drake, or whatnot. Like he, I may or may not talk about him later. Spoiler alert, but yeah, he's definitely one of the better rappers of the 2010s that just like doesn't get the recognition he deserves.
For sure. Now let's go to 2012, probably my favorite year of this decade. 2012, Joey, what you got for your best pick? I think I know. I think everybody thinks they know. What you think?
I'm going Good Kid, Mad City. Is that what you have as well?
Nope, but keep it on. Keep
going. Wow, I am surprised. I'm so surprised. Good Kid, Mad City. There are days when I go back and forth between this being Kendrick's best versus To Pimp a Butterfly. I love the story of the album. I love the mix of hits and introspection and storytelling. I agree. This was a really good year. And to me, this is like such a huge moment for Kendrick. And I couldn't really see myself picking anything else for this year, honestly.
It's the pick everyone expects. It's the pick that is not wrong. It ain't my pick. My pick is, and for those when I say it, people are gonna be like, oh, of course. My pick is Nas's Life is Good.
Hell yeah.
Here's why. So of course, Kendrick was his gigantic breakout. And honestly, it was a moment. There are times where you just look and you feel like there's a moment. I felt like that this year when we had the battle between Drake and Kendrick. Like it feels like a real moment, like we're witnessing history. And I kind of felt like that when Good Kid dropped. I felt like this is a moment. I was a fan of Section 80. I love Kendrick. This was special. And I was like, I think this dude is up. He's next up. However, the reason why I give Nas the slightest of edge, once again, I don't think Good Kid is a flawless album. It's a very important album. It's a classic album. But when we call it to actual quality, I'm going to go with Nas because this Nas album does what 444 and this recent Common album and a lot of albums after try to do. It is the maturation of hip hop. We saw a legend come back. He had a few rough years, and he showed us that like you can perform hip hop at a more mature adult level, at another level. And you and I have talked offline about Kendrick and Mr. Morale, and I feel like that kind of hits in this vein a little bit. And I know that has a it has a hot and cold take. There's definitely some division when it comes to Mr. Morale, but I think that the themes that Life is Good does, this dude who is a kid, who is a child of hip hop, but hitting this other level of maturity, this album does it so well. The production is dope. He has so much to say. Is some of his best songs in his career. And we saw later on in recent years, the King's Disease series, dude still has gas in the tank. But for me, I thought that 2012 was Nas's. Don't worry, we're gonna get to Kendrick. I'm gonna show him love later on, of course.
I love this Nas album, so it's a great pick. I think Nas has the best discography in hip hop because he shines throughout so many different eras. Like everyone talks about the Hit Boy stuff, but as you said, Life is Good. Like he was really in a point where you didn't think you would get that level of quality from him, and yet he was still able to produce that and bring the new subject matter and whatnot. So yeah, I love this album. It's a great pick.
The comeback of comebacks for sure. Now let's go to probably my least favorite year.
Yeah.
2013. What you got, Joey?
I had a hard time picking for this year because, like as you said, it's not that good, honestly. This felt like the year of really good rappers putting out like mediocre projects.
Facts.
This was Magna Carta Holy Grail, I think, that year. Nothing was the same as I think it's really good Drake album, but nothing that like Take Care didn't do. Like
Right.
I just think Take Care is a better version of that album. So, anyways, I decided to go with something that was more of like a moment almost than what I don't know, than an album I truly still listen to and love to this day. But I'm going with Acid Rap, which is a mixtape. Chance the Rapper. Some people say this mixtape didn't age well. I still have a lot of fondness in it, and I think that this period of like smoker rap, like laid back, chill that vibe. I think this is like one of the best projects under that sort of label, and I got put onto this like when it first drops by like some of my friends watching Chance freestyles before like he was like that popular. So I feel like I got to watch his come up and just being there to witness that and what this kind of feels like for like kids growing up in the 2010s. That's like kind of why I'm picking it. And I think it's definitely a still really great mixtape and probably my favorite project that year, but it's probably the weakest on my list of for each of these years. So what about you?
Absolutely agree. And before we get to mine, that's a great pick. When it comes to Chance, I remember there was a lot of hype around Chance, and like you, I heard some of the other stuff, and I was like, yeah. But when I heard this, I was like, okay. He had the song with Twista, Acid
Yeah.
Rain. I love that song. He had 3 or 4 really good songs. The song with Gambino. He had a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff that really stuck with me, really for years that I still go back to. So this is the one when people think about Chance. It's not Coloring Book for me, which was good, but
Yeah.
this was the one that made Chance Chance. So that's a good pick. I agree with that.
Cool.
For me, I was struggling because, like I said, I don't love this year. We had Born Sinner, which I think is a very underrated album. I don't feel like Cole really got his props until Forest Hills, but I thought Born Sinner was good. Pusha's My Name Is My Name is good, but it was nothing that like was like, the one.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go with Run the Jewels' first album. So I like Run the Jewels. Fine, I'm a big fan of Killer Mike, so he was cool. LP's a great producer. He's got bars too. But it wasn't until the later Run the Jewels albums that I really became a fan of the combo. But this album is pretty good, and I want to give it props for setting off that politically charged energy that the world was definitely starting to experience at the time. It was kind of ahead of the time. So I'm going to give them that for number 1 for 2013. Again, 2013 ain't my favorite, but we'll rock with it.
It's a good pick. I like Run the Jewels a lot.
All right, 2014. What you got?
All right, I got another one of those like nostalgia bait albums, I guess you could call it. I'm
Okay.
going with Forest Hills Drive. This is honestly one of my favorite albums ever. To me, it's the definitive album of one of the best rappers of, the 2010s, obviously. And I think for that reason alone, it's deserving to be in one of the best albums of the 2010s type of list. I don't think J. Cole on this album does anything the best. Like I don't think he has the best lyrics on this album. You can find, some underground albums that definitely have better lyricism. I don't think he has the best like hooks. I don't think he has the best production, but he packages it all in a way that is so precise and is made for like pressing replay and like listening to things over and over and over. So between like the introspection, the storytelling, the turning up, like I really think it's like the complete package of what I want in an album, and that's why it's my favorite 2014.
Yep. And this is the album that to me is the most important J. Cole album because we talked about J. Cole a couple times. Like I just blew everybody's mind when I said it was better than My Twisted Fantasy. I love that mixtape. And then Born Center, which was the year before, like that to me was a great album. But that was the album where J. Cole really became J. Cole and
Yeah.
found himself. And as observer of hip hop and a reviewer, this was the album where all of a sudden everybody was a J. Cole fan. Because before
Mm,
then, it was like, old heads like me, we liked him because of his potential. But I don't feel like he really penetrated your generation until that album. That's the
yeah.
album where people were like, okay, he's speaking to me. This album is for me. So that's why to this day, it's his signature album because of what he accomplished there. So yes, that was like my number two. But my
Mm.
number one, y'all gonna be mad because I'm going right back to it. This one is Run the Jewels Part 2. So
Nice.
Run the Jewels 1 was cool, but this was their best work. This was
I
everything
agree.
that the last album did, except it did it way, way, way better. And this is when I became a fan. This is where the chemistry gel. This is where Run the Jewels really was like, okay, they're a force to be reckoned with. Their later stuff was cool, but to me, this by far is the best of those projects. So 2014, I gotta give it to LP. I gotta give it to Mike.
Let's go pick. 2014 also had some honorable mentions. My Crazy Life, Pinata, Sylvia Demo, Isaiah Rashad. Like that was a crazy year.
Oh yeah, Pinata. Yes, a good one. We're gonna get back to Freddie in a little while, but yes,
I
what a year. 2015. We already know what this is gonna be, but Joey, do the honors.
All right, To Pimp a Butterfly. Like, can you pick anything else this year? It's definitive album, like one of the greatest of all time, all genres. I don't know how you choose something else this year. Respectfully.
Respectfully. Well, I'm playing. It's the butterfly. I did not pick anything else. By far,
Yeah.
this was the only option for 2015.
Yeah.
This was the album where you're right. To me, I've listened to a lot of hip hop. This is one of the best hip hop albums of all time. You
Yeah.
can argue with your mama, OVO stands, you can do whatever. Look, this is one of the best hip hop albums of all time. And I get why people don't like it. It's very dense, it's very
Mm,
heavy. It's not a ton of hits. We got all right, but like it's not a ton of hits.
mm,
But there is so much he has to say. It is so timely. It is not a coincidence. Well, it's a coincidence, but it's not a coincidence that All Right became like the song of the Black
yeah.
Lives Matter movement. It was created before, but Kendrick knew the tone, he knew the atmosphere.
Mm,
So perfect to have that song. This was the album that hip hop as a culture needed to get back to the hip hop has always had protest music and stuff like that, but we hadn't really put this generation of fans into that mode. And this is the album that got fans thinking more about the culture and how their story affects it. This album is so important, the most important album of the 2010s. I know people gonna say Kanye, that's wrong. This is the most important album of this decade.
completely agree. I can't say it any better myself.
I'm gonna shout out Lupe's Tetsuyo and Youth though. That
Mm,
wasn't the number one, but I love that album. And Lupe doesn't get enough love, so shout out to Lupe for that.
that album's great. I know you're not a Future fan, but Dirty Sprite 2 was also that year. I think that's one of the best like trap albums of the 2010s. Had a ton of hits on there, but yeah, it's a good one.
I would rather eat my iPhone than listen to Future. But as an unbiased reviewer as I am, I will absolutely say that it is a definitive album. It is the album that really made Future the Future that we know today, and for
Yeah.
sure one of the best trap albums of its era. If y'all say I'm biased, somebody run that clip back because I say that, even though it pained me. 2016, Joey, what you got?
All right, I'm gonna start getting to some of the hotter takes here. I'm going Still Brazy by YG.
Mm,
Um, My Crazy Life and Still Brazy, I think, are two of my favorite albums of the last decade. YG brought back this West Coast sound that was, evident at the time, but like no one brought it to the mainstream like he did. I love his energy, and this album is like super dark, and it also was the one with F Donald Trump on it, which turned out to be a
mm-hmm.
huge, in the same vein of protest music, like that song was pretty huge.
Yes.
And yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite albums the last decade.
What a pick. And I'll say this. People think that I would not like YG for obvious
Mhm.
reasons, but that album, I'd actually do rock with that album. That album is good. 2016 though, I've got to go back to my past and hip hop's past and give it to A Tribe Called Quest. We got it from here.
Mm,
Thank you for your service. To me, this album is so good because it's how you do a comeback album. We thought, look, y'all might not know, but we thought Tribe was done. We thought it was old. We thought Tribe was like the equivalent of Kanye and Jay-Z. Like, we're not gonna ever see an album from them anymore. They're too far
yeah.
apart. It's not gonna work. They came back and they made an album as good as some of their best work. I have
Mhm.
always said that Tribe's 3 album run, their first 3 albums, is probably the best 3 album run in rap history. This is like right underneath that. That's how good
Yeah.
this is. It is so well done. Again, so timely for the era. R.I.P. Fife. Just a absolutely great work. And if it was a way for them to like give one last hurrah, I can't think of a better way for that. So 2016, I'm gonna give that to Tribe.
Fantastic album. Can't complain with that pick at all.
All right, I'm very interested in this year to see what you pick. I think I know what you're gonna do, but we'll see. 2017, what do you have?
This was a tough one. I was between Damn, 444, and the one I ended up choosing, which is Forever is a Mighty Long Time, Big Crit. I Do you not like this album? I'm curious
No, I
because
love this
okay, you
album.
love
I'm
it.
so
Okay,
happy
good,
you
good.
made that pick. No.
Yes. All right. So when you talked about Big Crit being kind of the next iteration of Outkast, I completely agree. I don't really see the sound in the mainstream at all. Like I I love experiencing like what the South is like through his eyes, and Bury Me in Gold, the outro is like one of my
Oh,
favorite outros ever. It's
yeah.
so good. The soul in this album, just I can't even explain the feeling listening to like it's like a roller coaster almost. Like you got the higher energy songs, and then you got the introspection, and I don't know. This album is fantastic. I think it's a double album too, and one of the few double albums of the past 10 years that's actually like it's you don't get bored of listening halfway through.
Yeah.
So props to him for putting together such a large collection of songs that flow really well together, and that is such a good package.
Oh my gosh, Joey. Oh, you got me wanting to shed thug tears because this selection makes me so happy because this isn't my pick, but I want to talk about how good this album is.
Yeah.
So after we talked about the mixtape, which I thought was the best of 2011, Cole, I'm not Cole, Crit was doing a lot of kind of his first major label LPs, and they were not well received because the bar was so high from those mixtapes. To me, when he got to album mode, this is his best like official album outside of
Mm.
the mixtapes. And of all the double albums and playlist length albums that drive me absolutely nuts today, this is an album that deserved to be long because he
Yeah.
had something he wanted to say. He sequenced it right. Like you said, the first disc, if you want to call it a disc, the first half, that was all like the upbeat songs and the cool and the laid back songs. And then the second half was the introspection, the deep songs talking about life in the South, talking about his life, all authentic, all his experience. And even though it's this big package, it's a good package. It's like the difference between a good, some movies don't need to be 3 hours, but some movies are 3 hours and they don't feel like 3 hours. That's what this is. This is an album that's a 3-hour movie. It feels like a short 90-minute quick Marvel film. I love this album. But
100%.
To my pick, of course. See, now after that pick, I feel like my pick is so lame, but to me, it's the best.
No.
It is Kendrick's Damn, the Pulitzer Prize album. That's what I'm going with on this. I don't know how you
that's
feel.
it.
That's
a good pick.
Go ahead.
First of all, it's a really good pick. When this album came out, I did not like it that much because I kind of was expecting something more along the lines of Good Kid, Mad City, even To Pimp a Butterfly. And this is much more commercial, which I don't think is a bad thing at all. But like at the time, it was definitely my least listened to Kendrick album. And now like I listen to it a lot. I think it has really high replay value, and the messages he was sending, I think were less overt. Like I think you can listen to this album and not really think about it. And then there's another way to listen to it where you're actually like thinking about what he's saying. So I think that took me a little bit to really click within me. But yeah, it's definitely one of the best of this year and of the best last decade.
I agree. This album is another one of like his more divisive albums, like Mr. Morale, but that's in another decade. We'll get to that next time. We'll get to that in a few years. But this album, you're right, is so mainstream, for lack of a better term, that it felt unfamiliar from most Kendrick projects, but it's still great. To me, it's on the lower end of his discography, but if this is like one of your worst albums, you got one of the best discographies of all time. Shows how insane his run is. So I'm going with that one. I think it's his best. Shout out to Rhapsody. We didn't talk about her. Layla's Wisdom is a great album too that came out that year.
That one's great. That's my favorite Rhapsody album.
It's my favorite too. Look at that.
Oh, nice. I
love when we're on the same page. 2018. What's your pick?
I got Benny the Butcher, Tana Talk 3. I think this is a masterclass of rapping as well as creating this like dark atmosphere. It feels like you're watching, one of those mob movies from the 90s. Like I haven't listened to a lot of albums that are able to reach this level of atmospheric storytelling. I would, almost pick Daytona. There's also Care for Me in this year, DiCaprio 2, which is JID, which I love, Swimming Mac Miller, but Tana Talk 3, I think, is one of the best lyrical albums of the last several years. And I think a lot of underground rappers are now trying to chase like the standard that Benny set with this album.
Probably Benny's best album. I think there might be one other I'm missing, but like that's probably his best album. I love that album, and I agree. It's like the return of the mafioso rap from the mid-90s that I came up on and I love. So no doubt that that's one of the best. But I will go with, and I'm sure y'all gonna claim bias, gotta go with Pusha T, gotta go with Daytona. Now y'all might remember in 2018 when Kanye had his big like combine and he's gonna drop all these albums in the summer, and we were so hyped because we were like, oh, we're gonna get a Kanye, you're gonna get a Pusha, and we're gonna get a Nas. And I mean, I am a lapsed Kanye fan, but I was absolutely a massive Kanye fan in the 2000s. And secretly, before he was talking about slavery was a choice, secretly, we were always wanting him to like get back to where he was. We want that. And we just felt like this could be it because he's working with Nas and Tiana Taylor and he's back with Cudi. Them other projects didn't quite work, although I think the Nas album is better than gets credit for. This was the one. This was the one that absolutely worked. It's very short, very brief, but it's so dark and crazy and weird, and Pusha's so aggressive and lyrical. And oh my gosh, I love this to death. I love Pusha. To me, it's his best solo project, my favorite of the year.
Amazing album. in retrospect, it's kind of a miracle that it turned out so well because
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard the stories, but Nas was like so rushed making Nasir that like I don't know how Pusha T was able to like work with Kanye and get this product out of that.
It's insane. Nas has talked about it, and then Kanye went and was like, "Oh, he's rapping off beat." You talking about somebody rapping off beat? You chill. But it's a miracle that that project got out, and there's also a miracle that Kids See Ghost was as good as it was. To me, that's
Yeah,
the last like good Kanye project. But
yeah.
miracles do happen. 2019, we're gonna wrap it up with the final year of the decade. What is your pick for the best of 2019?
I went back and forth on this one. This is another really stacked year and one of my favorite years in recent memory. I went with Please Excuse Me for Being Antisocial by Roddy Ricch. This is a little different than some of the other picks that I've taken, but the reason why I'm picking this is because I think for first of all, it's just really fun album to listen to, but secondly, like for what the sound that Roddy was able to take and put it into a cohesive album that wasn't too long, that didn't have too many it didn't have like these songs that are throwaways, and it has like some introspective songs as well. War Baby is like my favorite Roddy Ricch song. But he was only 21 years old when he was making this album, so I think it's insane what he was able to accomplish. And some of the hits he put out were like some of the biggest hits of the last few years. So I went back and forth between like this and The Lost Boy, Revenge of the Dreamers 3, So Much Fun, The Plugs I Met. But ultimately, Please Excuse Me for Being Antisocial, I think it's my favorite album of that year. And as far as like a trap sort of sound, like I think this is some of the peak of that music. So
When it comes to trap, and I have my arguments with a lot of it, at least when he does it, it's well done. So I give him
yeah,
for that. Roddy's ride is so weird to me because it's like he came seemingly out of nowhere and he had like the biggest hits of the decade, like out of nowhere. And then he just kind of like, yeah, he just kind of vanished. So we'll see what I think because of his age, he still has some gas left in the tank.
Yeah.
But like his rise was just so like, atmospheric, and then he just kind of pittered out. So we'll see where he goes from here. But for me, my pick for 2019, Freddie Gibbs and Mad Lib, Bandana. I liked Pinata a lot, but there's something about Bandana. I don't know what it is, but it's something about it. I just feel like their chemistry hit another level from producer and artist. And I love a good artist-producer combo. I know in the late 90s, Nas, and not necessarily Nas, but Biggie and Jay, they kind of created this whole super producer phenomenon where you get an artist and you just get all the hot producers and you just all put it together. And the greats can do that, but a good album with one sound across it just works so much better. And Mad Lib gave Freddie his best, and they went in. To me, this is the album where I talk about, well, y'all dog me on Twitter when I'm like, Freddie is one of the best of the decade, and y'all are like, oh, but academic, blah, blah, blah. Chill, we're talking about bars. I think Freddie is one of the best, and this is what cemented him as part of that. And shout out to Rhapsody's Eve. I hate that I keep putting her in like second place, but she put some really dope albums. And honestly, as of right now, she has the album of the year for 2024. So maybe she'll top the 2024 list if we stay there. But I'm going with Bandana for 2019.
Great pick. And great point too on just like locking in with one producer, because I feel like the artist plus one producer type of albums on average, they're going to be better than, as you said, using a collection of producers. So I love that they just like tapped into this energy for Pinata and Bandana. Just classic albums.
Dope. So we're at the end. Joey, give me your final thoughts on the 2010s, what you liked, what didn't work, and your overall memories of it.
Yeah, definitely. This decade was so meaningful to me, obviously, growing up and, becoming an adult and like figuring myself out and like what I'm going to do for my life. So this decade is my favorite, I think, of hip hop. If we say like the 90s is the golden era, like this is my personal favorite decade. I think that 2013, 2015, we have like some of the peak of hip hop, and we saw, the big three come into formation. And now 10 years later, we're still trying to figure out who's going to be next, because Kendrick, Drake, and J. Cole are still like so big in the public eye, and still like Kendrick and J. Cole, at least, like you can argue about Drake, but the other two are definitely still putting out quality work. So a lot of the roots were laid in this decade for what's to come for the future. And some of the issues of this decade stem from the fact of like, we don't have any rappers that didn't come out of the 2010s. So it was so good that we now are having repercussions of like, okay, well, who's going to be next? Because the last generation is still flourishing. So it was an interesting decade. We saw hip hop really evolve, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at the beginning of the decade, people were saying hip hop was dead, right? And then now we got into this stage where it became the biggest genre with streaming and all that. It's just grown and grown and grown. So
exactly. I mean, Nas had no album called Hip Hop Is Dead, because it's transitioning into a way that a lot of not only fans but artists were trying to find themselves, because it happens so quickly that your generation doesn't realize it, but things change. I always say 2008 and especially 2009. Things changed like that. And what was hot was suddenly like irrelevant. And a lot of the vets were like, what? What's happening? What's going on? And you have this new generation that's finding themselves, and lots of young people who are really following them. And they're raw. They haven't really refined their sounds yet. And that's where like grumpy people like me are like, oh, they got to step their game up. And some of them did. Cole did. Kendrick did. They did find themselves. So this year was really a year of transition for hip hop. So we saw a lot of ups. We saw a lot of weird downs. But really in the 2020s, to your point, what I'm going to be interested in seeing is who steps up, because we got the big three, really the big two, but we got the big three, and they're still up there. Who can take it? Because right now it seems like the gap is huge. So let's see who's going to step up. I think I have lots of faiths in the Rhapsodies and some other ones who I think could really do some things. We going to see, but we going to keep listening. Joey, thank you for coming through. Where can players find you?
Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast. You can find me on Twitter at Gotham Hip Hop. You can find me on Instagram, Joey_hip hop. And yeah, man, I'm excited for what's to come. Hip hop, despite what some people might be saying, I think is still in a great place. We have, some of the most talented artists putting out music at, a very consistent level. And there's a lot to be excited for. So it's a good time.
Absolutely. Treat my boy right so Big Bro don't have to come through and yell at y'all. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining us for another edition of the Soul and Stereo Sessions. We'll see you players next time. Ahow.